And it's the net result is about freedom. It's about living in for us as followers of Jesus, living in step with the Spirit and being attuned to how He's leading us in our lives.
Well, welcome back to the Living Wholehearted podcast. I am your host, Tara Matson, and my husband, Jeff Matson.
Yeah, the famous one.
The famous Jeff.
No.
Well, today we're going to talk about something that it's pretty heavy, but we're in a series right now with some incredible guests, and we wanted to be able to jump in and talk a little bit more about the nuances around suffering, the theology of suffering, our resistance to suffering, but how God uses suffering in our lives to grow us and to make them more like Him.
Yeah, pain is one of those great equalizers that humans can connect on, right? There's not one of us that will be spared pain in our stories. And so when we think about suffering, and it is one of the biggest barriers that people have to coming to faith, how could a good God that they hear about or allow for good people to be suffering and to endure things that seem so unfair, so unjust? And those are valid questions. And it's not that you avoid those questions, but you actually move through them to have and develop a healthy theology and a healthy way of living. And practical helps to move through suffering. We've been around some wonderful people that have gone through some tremendous suffering. Everybody has it, suffering, but some people have it more. And I think that that's something that anybody could agree to. It is remarkable to witness people who go through their suffering well. And the fruit that comes from that is just inspirational, mind-blowing, and almost impossible to believe. So if you're out there listening to this and maybe you're already connected, maybe you're going through a period of suffering right now that just feels like I don't have the answers. I know what I should think, what I've been told I should do, but I don't feel it. I don't have it. This just is terrible. This sucks. Then, you're in good company. We've experienced some stuff like this in our journey too.
Stuff like this. We have. I think your point that everybody has suffering is a really important one that we want to stretch out a little bit, Jeff, because oftentimes, especially for those of us with even higher levels of trauma, we tend to dismiss our suffering. There's no use crying over spilled milk. People have it worse.
Yep.
And a lot of times we try to protect our children and the people in our families from any sort of overt suffering. But the truth is if you live in this world, suffering is a part of a broken, fallen world. It's one of the reasons Scripture says suffering's here is Genesis 3, that all of creation was really torn apart from God's perfect plan, people, the world. And so suffering can come in very unexpected, uncontrolled ways through natural disasters, and also in the way that we hurt each other. So the other reason for suffering is we are sinful people. We make poor choices. We lack trust of who God is and who He says we are. And so out of that, we try to meet our needs in our own ways, and we hurt ourselves. So sin not only hurts ourselves, but it hurts one another. So that's a second reason. And the final reason is sometimes there's just trials to grow us. We see that in the book of Job. And the way that I think Job is called a righteous man, a man of integrity. He trusted God, and yet everything was taken from him. And in the end, things were restored. But his journey was an example of you don't have to do anything wrong. And just living in this world, there are trials that can happen.
Some of you that may be listening are coming to us for the first time or early into the podcast, and you're kind of like, wow, I don't like that language. You just said I'm a sinful person. Like, aren't people inherently good? And you have an optimistic view of that. Well, just something that might help kind of entertain this idea and explore this further is just the fact that you don't have to teach a child how to be naughty. You have to teach them how to develop and grow character. It's just in us to want to do our own thing. And that is the core of what the Bible talks about being sinful or sin. Sin is any behavior that's outside of what God's design is. And it takes intention to develop and grow and be discipled in your journey of faith, no matter where you are, towards walking that out. And just because you've been walking that out on the spiritual journey for decades even, this side of eternity, we will continue to be battling those choices of, do you trust yourself or do you trust God? Are you going to do it his way or are you going to do yours? That's
Yeah.
kind of what it all boils down to. So hope that might be helpful for somebody out there that goes, ooh,
Yeah.
there you go again, calling people
It's a very churchy
Christians,
word.
Christians calling people sinners and full of sin.
Yeah. Well, we believe we're actually, if you accept Jesus, you now become a saint.
Yeah,
you get his
exactly.
identity as righteous and forgiven. But us saints do keep on sinning still in this broken world. But hopefully we're getting better at recognizing it and repairing along the way, which is a part again of the suffering dynamic. Suffering comes in all shapes and forms. And the biggest question, I think you alluded to it a little bit in the beginning, is why? Why me? Have you ever thought that? Like, why me? Why is this happening to my marriage? Why is this happening to my body? Why is this happening to my family, to my job? Suffering comes in all shapes and sizes. And so one, we established everybody has it in their life. And healthy people will notice it, name it, and grieve it. Unhealthy will minimize it, or we swallow in it. Wallow in it? Swallow in it.
Wallow in it.
I made up words. It's okay.
Okay.
It's part of my suffering in this life. So I make up words. Wallow. We wallow in it and we make it our identity.
Yeah.
But I think everyone along the way asks that question. Why? What do we do with that question?
Well, I mean, it's definitely something that you want to turn towards. You don't want to just avoid the why. I mean, you got to move through it and got to think through with others that might be trusted resources. I mean, in many cases, there are people in your lives that that you know of that have gone through incredible suffering experiences, and they're not in it anymore. And they would be a good person to connect with and to say, will you tell me more about your story? I'm kind of in it right now and I can't see maybe the forest through the trees, or and gleaning some examples from people who are trustworthy, who are model healthy vulnerability, can share with you and just join with you. And that is a huge part of the solution right there, is to not be isolated, to not feel and to begin to believe that it's just only you know this experience. It's actually amazing to connect with somebody else that can see you, that can know, and that also has gone through something similar, that can help lead you through. And, not provide all the pat answers, but just really the empathetic response be available to you so that you don't feel alone or isolated.
Yeah. So when asking the question why, you're saying go find some people that can hold that with you. They might not have the answer. And that's really a hard piece, is we don't always know the why. We don't know which of these three. Sometimes we can name it's a consequence of choices we made. Sometimes that's a really clear cut. Like, I made this choice. Now I'm having to live with the results of this choice. That can be a true, honest reflection, especially when you're sitting with safe people who can hold that with grace, who aren't shaming you, but are grieving with you and going, gosh, as you look back and wishing that you could have done something different, but having to learn to live with that. Sometimes it's in God's hands and we won't know till the day we meet him. And I don't even know if we'll care at that point, because we will be free of all of our tears and our sorrows and our suffering at that point. But there's this sense of asking the question why, that doesn't always have an answer, can be a part of the grieving. It's a part of what grief and loss calls bartering, where I'm going coulda, shoulda, woulda. I think sometimes if we can look back and figure out the why, then we can prevent suffering from happening again.
Sometimes
That's kind of the false sense of control. It's not a reality.
Yeah.
It's a reason why we ask why, is what I'm saying.
I got you.
Yeah. So instead of asking why, I've learned in my own journey and walking with a lot of grief and loss and suffering with clients and in my own story, when I want to ask the question why, I often will instead shift to what, Lord? What do you want me to do with this? And opening my hands a little bit more to recognizing that this could be a form of manure, what I talk about in my book, Courageous, holy crap, a form of fertilizer to help me to get to a clearer sense of his heart for not only me, but also for others. So what, Lord, what do you want to do with this? suffering with this form of manure.
Yeah, for the person that is a follower of Jesus and walking in them with him, it is significant to be able to turn towards him in that way, because you have that connection, and to lean in and to press in deeper to who God says that he is, who he says that we are, and to the examples that he gave us in the scriptures, who felt just like you feeling in terms of the why. What did they do? And they certainly didn't do it all perfectly, but there's incredible principles that are given to us in the Word of God to be able to draw from, that can help provide anchor points, things that grow and develop our faith through the suffering. I mean, even as you look at the church globally, big picture church, right? So in places where the gospel, it's hostile for people to be Christians, the church has always thrived and thrived since its inception in Greco-Roman culture, when it's persecuted, when suffering is present. And there's something about that God doesn't waste, and it's consistent over all of time. People grow when they are experiencing resistance and even suffering in many cases, particularly in their spiritual journeys. So it's understanding that we're part of something historically, and Jesus himself, our total example. He tells us that not to be surprised by suffering. No servant is greater than their master. And so even hearing from him that we can expect it, that we're not to be surprised. What did he do with it? What did others do with it that were followers of him, that were eyewitnesses and walked with him? Learning to connect to him is so important in this process, because so much of suffering, not all of it, but so much of it is used to help us to grow and to mature through the holy crap.
Yeah. Well, let me use my example. I mean, it's such a small example, but we have chickens. And one of the things that I've run up against in certain theology in the church, capital C, as well as just, I think, in our own family ideologies, is, if we just work really hard and we do everything right, we can avoid all suffering and and that's just not possible, as we've already talked about. Well, having chickens, it's like saying, if I do everything right with chickens, they will never poop. If you've ever had a baby,
or they'll only poop in a certain area,
or I think you can train them. I don't know, maybe, but they go everywhere. Chicken. If you know anything about chickens, so we have 11 chickens, and we stopped naming them after like our fifth flock, because eventually they don't stay with us after they stop laying. We pass them on to families who enjoy them for meals. So in terms of watching chickens, you cannot keep them from going to the bathroom. It's everywhere. So the question is, what do we do with that? Well, when I was an early gardener, learning, I learned that you actually can use it in your compost or directly in your garden to bear even better fruit.
That we eat.
You didn't have to point that out. But the idea, I mean, those of you that are farmers out there or do any sort of gardening, you understand that some of the best fertilizer is this ongoing, I think there's every animal under the sun creates some sort of manure that can be used for fertilizing. And so there's just small principles that are really helpful in real life to recognize that though it is messy, and it stinks. And that's true of suffering. It's messy, it stinks, and it seems like it's happening all the time. We might have small little windows of time where we get a break, but there's suffering not maybe just in our own stories, but in those that we love, our family, our friends, our neighbors, our community, our staffs. Suffering is happening all the time. And so the question is, what will this be used for? How will this be used? And it takes time. Over time, the changes in the chemistry of manure, I'm not a chemist, so I can't give you all that science, but over time, that turns into amazing soil for the fruit and the growth of good food that nourishes us. Mm-hmm. So that stretched out analogy that has holes in it, I know, is really helpful for me when I get to a place where I'm going, why isn't life finally at a comfort place? Like everything was status quo, and then something else happens. And it keeps me from throwing a temper tantrum in my own worldview. And actually, it's not good theology. It's not a biblical worldview. It's probably a Western privileged ideal to think that I can get to a place of comfort where there's no suffering.
Mm.
And that is not what we're called to, especially those of us who are followers of Jesus.
Yeah, I think that actually creates an anemic faith. Comfort can be an idol. And I know that I can feel that at times. I mean, and we're not talking about like, gosh, can I just have a little bit of a break, Lord? Because I've asked for that, We're not talking about the healthy rhythm of, or even just coming to the throne of grace, asking God for his help
mercy.
or for a break or for mercy. I mean, all of that is important as well. We're just talking about, Lord, about what is our God, And in the West, it is amazing how the pull towards materialism and towards radical individualism and isolation and independent, this thinking. We live in Oregon, the great state of Oregon. She's still great in many ways, but that idea of kind of being a self-reliant and having that pioneer culture and pioneer spirit, it's full on out here in many ways. And we can, what are we making our God practically? Comfort. That's easy to fall into. Money, possessions, our privacy, anything in place of God. He says in the first commandment, there shall be no other gods before me. And that's just whether you're a Christian or not. What are your gods? What takes your energy and time? Talk for a minute a little bit about the importance when you're going through suffering, sometimes to get that clinical help, because it's suffering's creating trauma that really it's not just, it'll stay with a person. Yeah. How do they, moving through the stages of grief is really important, but what about the trauma of suffering and how to get help in that?
My innovator mind went to 3 different mini sermons.
Just like that? Boom?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So first, let me start with.
Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Sure.
The first step is just recognizing, you said it earlier, the research is clear that when we go through suffering and we're not alone in our suffering, we have less effects long-term. We have less PTSD. We have all kinds, less anxiety, depression. God has made our brains and our bodies in a way that if we can tell our stories to an empathetic, present person, that it won't leave residue and we can move forward. And so counseling, professional counselors, that's what we're trained to do, is to sit in the really hard spaces when our friends and our family can't do that. And honestly, a lot of us wish that our friends and our family can, but sometimes suffering is so heavy and so hard. Having multiple people on the team and professionals having that unique boundary, that's the one space that they fill where family and friends and your community have dual relationships. There's other things that they're doing. Maybe they can take care of meals for you, or maybe they can help with babysitting, or maybe they're praying for you. There's other places that they can hold your suffering, but counselors are going to help by being that listening ear and to let you tell the story over and over, because the neuroscience is profound in seeing that healing. The second is, you mentioned the grief and loss stages, and I gave a slice. I gave bartering, which is the middle of the stage, but I want to clearly walk through there's 6 stages now. There used to be 5. The mental health field keeps changing. But the initial one is denial. What suffering? I'm fine. Everything's fine. When I hear the word fine, that's not an emotion. I usually name it as the Christian F word. Because fine is not something, it means we're kind of non-existent. So you can say I'm numb, I'm in denial, but fine is not an emotion. So I just want to name that. If we're saying we're fine, it usually means we're in this first stage of grief and everyone else is going, are you okay? Are you okay? Because they're seeing the hurt and the suffering going on. Second stage is usually the sadness. It's usually the feeling of loss. Something, I lost something. Maybe it was my sense of comfort, security. Maybe it was actually my health. Maybe it was a relationship, or it was a dream. It was what I thought was going to be. But loss is usually connected to that sadness. Next phase is anger. A sense of injustice has happened. Why me? Why did this happen? Why now? It's a lot of wanting action that could have happened, should have happened. And then the next one is bargaining. It's a false sense of control. It's the coulda, shoulda, woulda. If I had only done this, if I had said this, it's not real. It's not true. We will do this with every kind of loss where we logically know we had no control, but we need to be able to voice it and to get it out. And then there's a sense of being able to move towards acceptance, where this is my new reality. This is my new normal without what was before. And then the final stage is making meaning. And this is where people who live with chronic sense of suffering, you'll see them with that really good fruit you were talking about.
Yeah.
You'll see them making meaning of going, here's how God is using my suffering that still continues. Some of us don't get relief from the suffering in our stories. There is so much that we can gain from being able to weave in our suffering to go, here's how it's being used as fertilizer in my story and in the story around. But to jump there is not, you're still in denial. So if you if you don't go through these other phases of grief and loss with a professional counselor or a friend or a mentor, spiritual director, a coach, if you don't go through those, you're still in denial by trying to make meaning, which is what a lot of Christians do. Is we're like, God will use all things for the good of those who love him, Romans 8:28. But we don't allow room for lament and for a shaking of our fists with God like Job did, and being able to be very human in the reality of what has happened.
And when that happens, we're kind of in pseudo control over our process, and we are white knuckling things that leak. And it's not complete. It's not. That's what I'm hearing you say, that you haven't moved through the process in a complete way. And it's not just a linear process. Sometimes you go back, right? Yes. I know that you don't just kind of like arrive to the destination of meaning and never go back to bartering or a sense of anger. It can be back and forth, but you kind of want to turn towards that. And as God brings those feelings and that process in there to mind, turn towards it, just another layer of working through it. And that it's helpful though to know that there's stages and that what the stages are, and to make meaning even of how you feel, and to have some places to land so that you don't feel like you're just out there other and nobody gets it and there's no purpose in it, or it's just all chaos. No, I mean, it can feel that way at different times. But that structure is sound, researched, and something that people can depend on, and with the presence of others, come alongside and help them.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I want to draw out, and that is, it does help to have people who have similar kinds of suffering around you. This is where support groups or finding friends. So you're going through divorce. It's helpful to be with other men or women who are actually been there or are going through it. If you're going through cancer, helpful to have others who have been there or going through it.
Sure.
And it's also helpful for you not to isolate and to only be with people
That's true.
who have had suffering, because we need to also be around people that are in the beauty and the joy of life, so you don't lose that. That is one of the ways that we start to wallow, is we start to feel this is the enemy's camp. We start to feel like I'm the only one that has ever experienced this. Yep. That is not true. Yeah. And it's a way that we can kind of start to only bond or be with people who've experienced something similar to us, and everybody else doesn't get it. And we're missing out on the fullness of healing when we only, and we see this as particularly in abuse recovery work. People coming out of abuse will often just hang out with women or men that have been abused, and we don't learn how to do repair or healthy relationships, and we just stay in unhealth. And so being able to be with people that have also maybe get it and understand currently, who have been there and have gotten it from the past, and those that don't get it, because you want to stay connected to the rest of the community. We need you. We need each other to be able to have compassion and empathy for what God's heart is. Yeah,
it's easy, like you say, to stunt our growth.
Oh,
and and so those are some of the tips that help us to stay in reality, stay in a process of healing, and actually move through it. And that famous phrase that you like to use a lot, feel it to heal it, is just true. There's no shortcuts in that. And I've worked with a lot of clients that are in executive roles in their businesses or in organizational settings. So do you, and we're talking about the same stuff there. And many of them share our faith, share a biblical worldview, have a Christian worldview. Not all do, though, and we're still bringing those kinds of principles forward, right? Because God's design is perfect, and whether people yet want to integrate that and assign that to Him or not, it's still good for them to be able to experience some of these things and to, human to human, feel a sense of, and maybe you're out there and you're doing that with others right now. You're walking with somebody who is in suffering, and you're trying to be like Jesus to them, and whether they know Him yet or not. So hopefully some of these tips are helpful to you as you try to maintain your own health. Maybe talk about that for a second. Talk about what it looks like for help for the helper in that situation. How do they not get caught up in unhealthy ways in another person's suffering that they're walking with, or perhaps it's in a family system where one person's really suffering and the other person is trying to be there as the support or the care person. What are some important things for them to remember?
Yeah, it reminds me of what we do in our cohorts and with our executive leaders around concentric circles. And the reality is that one human being, I think the research, it could be different now, but the original research is like one person can really only hold about 66 people. And if 66 of those people are suffering, you are going to crumble. We can only hold so much.
Is that like in a lifetime, or is that like
at a time?
At a time.
And so now when you think about your colleagues, your staff, your family, maybe you've got like 50 cousins, you've already maxed out. If you have 6 kids, man, you're really pushing it. Your church community, you add social media on there, like we're way past 66, too many of us. So really thinking emotionally, I can only hold. And if I'm more introverted, wiring wise, I need to be able to go deeper with those 66.
So it's even less. Yeah.
So I always think concentric circles of who is in my most inner circles. They get my empathy and my comfort and my care more, and my time when it comes to if someone in that circle is suffering. That means I have to say no and have more boundaries for people who are on the outer circles. Sometimes we flip it, especially Christian leaders. We have a paradigm sometimes where it's like, well, Jesus had, he was just there for everybody. And I go, well, was he? I mean, he pulled away with the Father, and then he had his 12, and within his 12, he had his 3. And John thinks he's the favorite, right? So
the disciple that Jesus loved.
So
he writes of himself.
Yeah. And he goes, there's times where Jesus sets boundaries, where people are knocking down his door. He's in a town and they're like, where are you? People need you. And he's like, we're moving on because we have something else over here. And so he leaves people in their suffering, which I am like, what?
Yeah.
But he is Jesus, but there gives us this freedom to say, we are not everyone's savior. We're not even the savior, but to be able to recognize who needs me the most. And if there's people in my inner circle that are suffering or need that time and that care and that comfort, I need to be able to limit the amount of people that I'm caring for. There's only so much, and everyone's got different buckets, but you got to figure out what your bucket is. And then if everybody's really healthy and doing really well, considering in your inner circle, your marriage, your kids, your closest friends and community, then maybe you have room and margin for helping more people in the margins of your story. Would you say that differently? I mean, using concentric circles.
Yeah, it's just that's an ancient framework, but we just have placed relationships in there to help us to attune to what the priorities are. And it's the net result is about freedom. It's about living in for us as followers of Jesus, living in step with the Spirit and being attuned to how He's leading us in our lives. first and foremost, our relationship with him. So that's God and I in the inner circle. If you're a follower of Jesus and you are married, then your spouse is the second circle. Things get a little funky when sometimes we put our spouse before the first circle and before God, right? That's not the order. If you're married, you're a follower of Jesus and you got kids, your kids are in your third circle. And certainly it can get tricky right there when you move kids before their spouse or before God. So that order, if you are married and have kids and you're a follower of Jesus, that's a defined order. That is that's in place in God's design. Then there's tons of freedom as to the outer circles. You might place work after that because you spend, after all, maybe most of your waking hours on the job. You might have extended family there. You might have friends. You might have lots of freedom. And of course, if you're not married, then spouse isn't your second circle. And if you don't have kids, lots of freedom after that as well. But there's something important about that design that allows us to stay in step with the Spirit and also to be able to make choices and live in freedom. And what to say no to, because just even that alone, especially even in times of challenge and suffering, just knowing which way is north is so hard at times. And so using that framework that we offer, and we do offer it on our website for free to be able to order some of the relational designs and the things that you're doing, can provide that help and that practical sense of, here's how I can say yes and no.
Well, since you're saying it, it's on the executive coaching page. So if you wanted to get access to the concentric circle, even though that wasn't really my point when it came to suffering. So sorry, I took us over there, but it does mean if you're suffering yourself, you're going to hone in even tighter with your concentric circles. You will not have room for the margins. And I think
to say no.
That's part of integrity, is recognizing where we are in our stories. There was a really hard, we've had some really hard seasons, Jeff, and we're so grateful to have made them through.
Yeah.
But there was hard seasons of, we had like a 3 to 4 year journey, and we had to tighten in. We had to be very thoughtful about who we gave our margins to and our energy to, because we wanted to finish really well with our girls and in our marriage, making sure our marriage was healthy and our smaller community got access to us more. That's just the reality, and having grace for people who are going through harder seasons. It's interesting that people from the margins want to come in and be like, hey, how can I help? And sometimes those people can turn into someone of your best friends. But for the most part, to be thoughtful of the fact that suffering takes so much energy for us to move through it well. Grief is heavy. Grieving and taking time to grieve well takes a lot of time and energy. And so we just don't have margin and room for a lot of the extra.
I just thought of something that came to my mind about the body. I mean, even all of God's design points to these types of things. But when there's an injury in the body, let's say there's an infection, like a lot of the body's resources focus in on that specific area. And that's the same principle applies, of course, in outside the body and suffering and scenarios there. It's like our attention needs to kind of come into inner circles, into the area that needs that help. I'll oftentimes talk to ministry leaders, for example, who are pastors, and maybe there's something that's going on from a morality standpoint, that there's been a breach in trust. Maybe there's a sort of a secret that they've kept that comes and emerges. And this is the time for them to kind of pull back and to attune to their inner circles if that's affecting their spouse or affecting their kids, and even pull back from the ministry. And we help churches and have helped a number of churches to do that. So to your point, when there's suffering, it's a time to pull back, a time to focus in on the area, a time to go through the process thoroughly. And that's tricky when leaders, particularly, which is our specialty, they want to move through it as fast as possible. And based on wiring, get back to the good times. There's no shortcuts in working through stuff like this.
So as you're listening to some of the stories and the guests that we have on this next couple months, you can come back and listen to the previous episodes or the ones that are coming. Just want to make sure that you hear our heart, that suffering is a deep part of our journey as leaders, as human beings. And I've been in the Old Testament, been reading quite a bit about the Israelites coming out of slavery, which was a suffering of its own, right, of captivity. And even God used that to multiply them. They went in to Egypt with 70 and they came out with millions of men, women, and children. And so they also came out with a lot of skill sets, and they came out with some wealth because of what happened with the shakedown with Pharaoh. I'm going to go back and read that story. It's pretty profound. And then you go and you see them in the wilderness, and they have a different kind of suffering. They're like, I thought we were going to the land of milk and honey and the promised land, and we're eating this. And then the temptation to have expectations about what life is supposed to be is also a challenge for all of us, especially when things feel harder than we had imagined.
Or when we've done so many things right, we think.
Yeah, and we go, we don't
deserve this.
Yeah, that challenge for all of us is to really have God, really examine our heart and help us to really look at our theology and our understanding of who God is, and then who we are. And a lot of times we're complaining in the wilderness about what God, and we forget what he rescued us from. I mean, they forgot that they were in slavery, and they're like, hey, we want to go back because the meat was better when we were in bondage. Yeah. And that idea of just continuing to miss out on what is currently here with also the promise of what God has ahead for us. And it's just this interesting dynamic. I have one last thought. I know that you've got something you want to add on there, but it's just this interesting dynamic to recognize that God says several times. He says it right after they get out of slavery, and then later on before the promised land, but that these hard times were meant to help them trust God in the midst of the hard. It was to grow their trust muscles. And so when I can come back to that and I go, what's this about? Help grow my trust muscles to know that you're a good father, that you have good things in store, and that you will use this for the good of those you love. In the right context, we're going to use Romans 8:28. But you're a good father. And that is really, at the end of the day, can I trust you even when my story looks like this?
I think everybody needs to ask that question, honestly. Can I trust you with who you say you are and who you say I am? Because I think the whole arc of Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament, all points down to that, can be condensed down to, do you trust him? Do you trust me, he says, or do you trust you? I mean, every story in the Scripture boils down to that. So him developing our trust muscles, he's wooing us to that side of it. And that is, suffering is often, I'm not going to say every time, often used by God to help us to grow our trust in our relationship with him. And it's not seen until you get kind of further into the journey. And that doesn't minimize anybody else's experiences in this process. But the thing I was thinking about was just something that mentors or friends of ours used to say to us: "Don't let your reality dictate your theology." And that's what happens so often. Is that our experiences, we're looking to make meaning of it, and we go, "That can't be. It must not be that." And so then we develop beliefs that are really inaccurate, actually leading us further into trauma and to suffering. And let your theology dictate your reality. That really is taking God at his word, who he says he is, who he says we are. And that of course has been abused as well by people who in their own traumas were using the Scriptures to get their needs met in unhealthy ways, and using others. So we got to have trusted guides who understand, who are trauma informed, who have a trauma informed theology, and who understand Jesus and how Jesus approached trauma and suffering. And to get deeper into that, you get closer to him, and you can help others to do likewise. Yeah. So let your theology dictate your reality. And if rather than your reality dictating your theology, that's a slippery slope. I hope today is encouraging in some respects that whether you're in it or you're walking with somebody who's in it right now, that we understand and we care. And at Living Wholehearted, we have resources to help support people in their journeys through this process. That helps them through those places and leads them to places of healing and wholeness. Yeah. And we understand it also in our own personal lives and what that's like. So
we do.
You're not alone.
We're not alone. And that is an important reminder. You're not alone. God is there And he's asking, waiting actually for you to ask and invite him in to be able to do this with you, and then to reach out to the people in your community. And then if you need us, go to livingwholehearted.com. We've got professional counselors who know how to help walk in the midst of all kinds of suffering. And our executive coaches are trauma informed and know how to walk with you as well if you're an executive in your organizations. We love to be able to come alongside you.
Just as leadership has its own form of suffering.
Yeah. Okay,
just being a leader.
That again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so good to be with you, Jeff.
And great to be with you, Dara.
And I hope you really enjoy some of these special guests that we have. And just to remind us again, all of us have suffering. So don't minimize your story and don't over dramatize your story, and recognize that every one of us, every person you meet has a story and at some point has gone through some sort of suffering. So having compassion for ourselves and one another is a huge fruit that comes from really doing suffering well. Until next time, continue to grow into the leader that you would follow.